Kerumuchin, that Jerumuchin, huge 10, and Jerumuchin to number mendo ngakton, Kerumuchin, and Jerwa,
No.
or dearie, that Jig Tanda de Yapse Sumche, and Su Shila Tanda Chiche, that Jidil Jerumuchin Jig Jagra, they said, di Jessica Bangande, the Retajan Gilet and the Jeff Kerumuchina, Kezarum Candil Hajerangi, Tangaram Mare, that the Candil Haje, the Chambagombonema, the Yungura, Jessica Banganding, shed under the Redera, Kerumuchina, Jerumuchin, Signan Chumajora, or Diris. The Candil Haje and the shed under Mare.
Is this Tanga depicting Lama Tsongkhapa? Yes, but is this a Tanga of Tanga for the purpose of Ganden Hakyama, the 100 deities of Joyous Land? No. So what is this Tanga of? This Tanga is painting, depicting appearance of Lama Tsongkhapa in 5 manifestations after his parinirvana. So when Ketub Rinpoche, his younger disciple, he missed Lama Tsongkhapa so much, and so he may have prayed to Lama Tsongkhapa, and then Lama Tsongkhapa manifested in these 5 different forms. It's called Sikbangadin. 5 visions.
The number of diamonds, how much is Jerumuchin there?
So there are different manifestations, but all believed to be Rinpoche. Do you know Rinpoche? Lama Tsongkhapa.
Oh, dear. Tangzo gom des jara, tangi sam gom denema, tangi sam gom denema jabda, jabu set up dene yangja, tuzi bebjan che, naguni ne ya ten, tangbo, sim to jabu chinla yon, and sim to subhanala to yuera uk the nimdol yuasa, and dene uk koran la samadan, shinda samadan maren, dene 당고 우다제 우다연 요시 근데 우다메 우칼레라네 파 당기요 수 당기요 하디 당고도가 피부케이션 데시 엔 제라 피부케이션 삼당 말에 엔 우코랑가라 심네기도게 따로 우릉보 직당야 우통동 직당제 이 하고도 셰버치 어두 세제다 검데스 잡스러.
So could you please resume the meditation that I had to do, that I had you do in the first session? Revisualize merit field or objects of refuge, and then feel how your mind is completely drawn towards them, inspired by their qualities. And next, then the mind comes back to you as you inhale. And for the first part, you could do some nectar purification. After a while, then focus on breath. First, breath with sound, some breath with sound. Next, breath without sound. So, after having done purification, then the focus should be only on the breath. Take deep breath and deep inhalation and exhalation. Then a short one to see how during the sound-free breathing, the mind is sharply focused on the breath.
다 우파 당수 당 하코스나나 아니 장가지로 나심 남도 담을 셔거든 uk데 스격스 당거려 장가 기승나 신지 제다 숨제우 숨죠 양 참데 드셔 양 비니 엑서사이즈 양 아체우 숨죠 양 참데 드셔 양 듄셔우 숨죠 아니 디심시와 디간가 심샤지도 스자도나 야 그래서
As you become very aware of the inflow and outflow of breath, then count the breath. So count the cycles of the breath, 1, 2, 3, and up to, okay, and do 3 times 3, and have a pause for a while. And if you notice thoughts creeping in, then again do breathing exercise. And now 3 times 5. At the end of that, pause in the stillness of the vivid mind. Again, if the vividness is ruffled by thoughts, do 3 times 7, by which time thoughts should have stopped, and they then again remain in the stillness of the mind.
Oh yeah. 다 되는 데 아니 먼저 다단다 기승에 돈이 건다 림바들라네 돈이 건배 펜다 돈이 건배 림바 디즈니 돈이 건배 림바들라 다 간상게 담에 건배 림바 초에 담에 건배 림바 다 초에 담에 간사 담에 건배 림바들라 다 디제 망보지 여러와데 단다 우마주바 아니 마시샤 도샤나 다 비야보도 체전디 저란도 데 sabject 여러 디시샤 마데 도샤 고스라
Now, having been relaxed, let's go to the subject matter, which is meditation on selflessness of phenomena and person. So before that, I said I will deal with this under two broad sections: benefits of understanding emptiness and the stages of reflecting or understanding or gaining understanding of emptiness. So they are understanding selflessness of person and understanding selflessness of phenomena. So now you have synopsis of selflessness of person based on Madhyamika Avatara. So if you can please turn to that.
다딜라 다란 신지 두가 와세도 니버세데 다데 체모가 다란 신지 두가 와당 다게오란 신지 두가 와 다란 신지 두가 와서 다세데다 다딜야 아니 신데데베 다가 와다 란데데베 다가 와스타 디즈니스로 시샤나 야보다 신데시두다 지 단다 다데 신데데베 다데 간조 단다 다지런진 도와데 애니 단다 디샤고 풍불레 텐신베다로 풍불레 텐신베다 다 힌두게 도고요 다단당 알아서 눕죠이나 단다 이슈게 저런조다 이슈게 지도나네야 중대비 인상 망보시우지 솔라이들 이지요로 어디 풍불레 텐신베다 데레다 신다 삼로다 자첨보 단식 다보다 지워다 라온다 찍도즈데 삼고 가고 여르딜레 다단다디 말아주 이슈기 솔라 샤그도 어디래다 솔라데 컨디스티 고르스나 풍불레 텐신베 다샤고라 다레라고 해로 솔라디 디 풍불레 텐신베 다디 경어지 탐제리야마 딱 정말로 죽도니시 딱베 다샤그도 하고 다그라리 네간라 체주 숨디 다보 지오랑 체주 숨디 디나라 창용고 찬다 솔라이데 다디 체주 숨 참마다 담아가오체 다 나란저 이지 망부지 전한저 다 춘주간에 이슈기 지도나라 차대비 인자 티게제디 휴지 셰지 데데 이지 여러와디 인데지 여래 솔라이지 여래서 다 딘데게 솔드 수승원에 이지 간데 치기도로 솔라이드 간데지 원래 지금도 다다 풍불의 텐신배 풍불의 텐신배다 풍불의 텐신바 봐 풍부 gen직 전에 고마도 얘기서지 풍부 먼저 류된의 직나야 고 솔라데 자와치마 이슈기 냐와다 안에 이슈와지 탁싱다는데 누구라고 여러와 디도니에 솔드레라고 여러와 제가 제가 디 딱베서를 샤용 거다 제가 데레다 풍불의 텐신배다데 디 페이징 외신 렐하이스레 풍불의 텐신배 다디 딘데간라 바삼다나로
So 당부 사실 그것을
다란 신기도
가봤다 다 그거랑 신도 가로
이제 디나네 다란 시도 가고들라니 신데다베 다가보다
라트신
또 디탄다와 데도에다
So in dealing with selflessness of person, first the section says refuting a self different entity from the aggregate as held by the non-Buddhists. Anyway, for here, first, refuting self of a person and refuting refuting mind, refuting refuting inherent existence of self. Number one, refuting inherent existence of mind. Now, dealing with refuting self of a person or inherent existence of person, first we have to refute the notion of self held by Shanti, means other schools, particularly in the ancient context held by classically Hindu schools. And now, in the modern context, a self that's different from aggregate. The view of self held, the view of self to be different from aggregate, held in the modern context could be the view of soul, as is quite prevalent in Christianity. And so, a lot of people have been brought up in this spiritual context, and therefore, without having to use reason, whether soul is permanent, single, independent, although you could use it, but dispensing that for the time being, since one has been brought up in this broad culture, how do you react, and how do you conceive of soul? How do you conceive of soul? A soul seems to be independent of the aggregates, such that when the aggregates age and die, soul, the person doesn't die, the person goes to heaven and so on. So please first spend some time how that is viewed from your experience of being born and brought up in the culture.
Rwa Pungbule nga sudi Pungbule Tuenshin beta tanda Rwa da Ngarang Mangboji Solai di nga yisugoro da yisugoro da.
So because many people believe soul is me, and it is different from aggregates.
Tadi yungzu gom gyabjingi la ya di de sebu roji suyonarwa. Tadi ya sol dewa mena yungzu Pungbule Tuenshin daji yu tingi yor tangzu Mangboji larwa. Pungbule Tuenshin be Pungbudan dewa meni daji. Ta 당이 시나라 다스니디 풍부단 저 당이라고 되라 뭐하셔 된데 지금 당 거기도 따다로와 그래서 풍부래 텐신배 다서 저나도 망부지 땅가 되기네 솔사지 요래 팅도나 디컨데시도 따다로와 이 되기수수 이지체네 저나도 라그라 내지레시는 메고르드 라시라 메고르드 디컨데시도 직다다 라야 고데스 요래라고라다 솔디.
So please let's do some reflection and see what soul is like. And if you don't want to use soul as an example of a self different from aggregate, then you still see whether in your heart of hearts you believe this self that is not dependent on aggregates or that is different from aggregates. So kandechu, and if you use soul, you take that before you, and then kandechu, the ta means look at it, what it is like. Sometimes when the people say, "Oh my God," and then because in that case there's a kind of people then think that soul is created by God, and what is it like? Please look at it.
Oh yeah, that is gumjab. That is so marero. Pa jik tinde ji yor sigdo di khande ji do so maro. Su sem gi nga sia di. Ta tanda ngara ta digala ni mishinda den de. Ah, je pe duja do lawi na. Nga duja me si. Nga ya go yo si di samna na shadan joro. Pungbo dan de me den jog. Nga jik pe ya go shyo ji yo si ya yoro da. Ya sebu cha yong gora. O tinde ya ta sebu ro ji. 차와 된 것인 tum나 다게 되고 왔다 될 믹스에 깔레 잡스 시고 말해.
In identifying self other than aggregate, please use the soul as a topic, and and then see what it is like. Also, when you are accused by somebody as you are very bad, and then it is an affront, and you say, "I'm not bad," and you retort and defend yourself. At that time, in one of hearts, when one says, "I'm not bad," there's a kind of I that's not related to aggregates.
자 tinde기 풍불의 퇴신배 다디 저기 계산당 산이마 돈예도 정말 셈나라 찍바르시 따요나 텐데 다디 딱보 따용 거야 그러봐 아이나 알아서다 알아서 망보지 낭벨로 좀 제자 미지 깨지티나 다디 딱보를 베스나 먼저 남산 다 딱보 말입니다 그래서 라구르와 이나야 셈나네 야 바다다 대돈이 지금 그러봐 그 엘레다지 롱어마 치마마데나 타랑게 다다 단데다 단기 야 곰자가 마용콩기 다데다 단데가도 타니외다도 마지 징진도 딱 봐봐 단다랑 직존예도 그래대가도 단다랑게 대지 유sam산도 정말 마지 징지로 봐 나마다 치마 찍받진 인자 딱 받진 바데 어두스네 투기 차네 샤바 채운데 단지디 레용요 딱 한다는 거 미도와 마도 친제라 단질 현질리 그래 나 낭바이 나데 다다와 르징 말에서 소트웨어 말에 캘린치도 그러는 거 다다고 말했어 다다고래서는 다다고 말했어 뒤제 탐제 미다고래서 또 뭐전된데 송샤스로 다 이는 디셈나라 이지 제데 수수게 삼로 땅제 제버체 삼로당 삼로 퇴와 삼바 망보신 네 삼배 되라 아니 도도 쳐가지고 여러와 어디 애니 신두 다다다 오면도서 니바니 도고르미시지 대매 친제라 근데 풍불에 텐시베 다디 지부직장다 다닝다 딱 계산도 마다나 단단하게 단대 나마다 치마니 직보다인데 nga지 징지스 땅지 다갈리고 봐 다다고즈메 땅지 다갈리고다
So with this question of self different from aggregates, if if one thought to oneself, the self, oneself yesterday, oneself today, and oneself tomorrow, yeah, the same self. If one had a feeling it's the same self, then that that borders on believing self as permanent, and and if one is asked by somebody, is self permanent or impermanent? One will say, oh, self is impermanent. One is able to, as I stated yesterday, one is able to give the correct answer that one has based on information one has received. Okay. If we see the difference between self that was before the start of this session, before you entered the hall, and the self now, there's still some gap, and you might say, oh, the self is impermanent. And however, first moment, ngaji jikten is a really critical term here. Ngaji jikten, holding prior and subsequent, holding immediate prior moment and immediate subsequent moment as one, really leads to seeing the self in the immediate moment, preceding moment, and the self in the immediate subsequent moment. Because of the brevity of moments, one is unable to see the separation. One holds them to be one, and therefore, in that case, one considers or one believes. One can't help believing it's the same self, the self before the two very short close moments. So, however, due to education, or one would say self is impermanent, because I have learned Buddha's discourse, which says all phenomena are all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. So although one may be able to articulate that, if in one's heart of heart one is not able to see the difference between the separation of the self in the two close moments, preceding moment and the subsequent moment, and if one has not come to see that as distinct moments, then if one has failed to do that, one will also fail to see the impermanence of self and the two moments. So, Singvanan Toto means despite knowledge of impermanence, but in one's own heart, the reification, rather not reification, in one's heart, one must be able to resolve the issue through experience.
제가다 언제 마지 진지 따그랬다. 알레 나파샤로 탭딜로 탭딜 상다나 가시에다 다른 쇼에 탭 계산 탭 드링 탭 지구지 그냥 이 튕거려가지고 탭 따고서 단지래대.
So let alone self. Ngachi jiksen, please, okay, ngachi jiksen, the sameness or the oneness of prior and subsequent moment. Let alone with reference to self. The book that's on the table, again, although the book is undergoing momentary changes because of the brevity of the changes, shortness, so we think to ourselves unwittingly the book is the same.
뭐보다 단기 단당아 탭로야 되다. 단기야 라고마자고 조제가 탭나 단대 탭디 삼단디 지구에 튕기도 알아. 되레다 단지.
So no, to give a more telling example to myself, the book that I picked up a moment ago on the table, and the book that I'm now holding for me, I'm picking up the same book, and that is Ngachi Jikten, holding oneness of prior and subsequent moments, and therefore, I'm holding it in my mind, permanent, to be permanent.
제가다 이제 양 캘린치로 하게 대 미지게 대미다서 미다고래 뒤졌던 제 미다고 사실
despite that unwitting, unconscious belief in its permanence, but my philosophical position is the book is impermanent. Why, if you ask, if somebody asks, because all all conditioned phenomena mitakpam is impermanent.
that 캘린데 떠르면 심낭 짐바데 뇌도문다 심낭 짐바네라 다 상다 탭입니다 그래서 깨지 주어도 그래서 안 규진도 주어도 그래서 그 라운드에 튜뉴어 미디어레스 내 상당한데 아니 되네 때 주어데 사브로도 알아.
So when somebody asks, is the book impermanent, I will be able to articulate my learned position and say, oh, the book is certainly impermanent because it's composed of conditioned phenomenon. But that ability has not undermined my seeming unconscious belief in its sameness of preceding and immediate preceding and immediate subsequent moment. So here, again, we need to be able to address the issue inside. And there, we can say the book is impermanent because the book changes moment by moment. And how short this moment? The briefest moment is so short, yet the book is changing that fast. The book is also impermanent because the book has come into being dependent on causes and condition. Book is an impermanent phenomenon because why? Because the book doesn't exist. The book doesn't exist in the second moment after coming into being. The book doesn't continue. The book doesn't stay subsequent to the moment it has come into being. Given this, then one may come to terms with that, and such reflections may address the issue inside.
다 당도니나 단다 다 풍불의 텐시에 다데 아주 딱바 캘린치기도 하다 간데 되는 징기도 하는데 되는 이제 이지 치기도 하다 다디 와 어디 딱 세월 직차 당부대 세월 차고 그래서
So this dichotomy with us. Philosophically, intellectually, we have a clear position. The book, for example, is, or the self is impermanent. Self is impermanent. Yet, the second is in the heart of heart, unconscious position is the book seems to be the same from moment to moment.
다 너도 곰디스 잡으러
So
아 스디 풍불에 된 셴바 nga 숙불에 된 셴바지 다기도 민도 따들어 따네 디 ene 마직 정말로 캡드니 서치로 캡드니 서 주어메 되어서다 다 다가라게 엘레 다다고 짐바데 ngotwe 딜레 띵섭도 도 말에 딜레 띵섭도 나야 다 참무진야 가나 파도고 요 딘데지 ngo 심바 다가라게 엘레 먼저 다다고 다주디 다 ngo 심바레로
could you now spend few moments reflecting on I in a bit to identify self or I held to be seen to be different from aggregates, the position held by the non-Buddhists. So think of I and see whether that I seems to be different from your form aggregate. And then see if it that I has a pervasive dimension, just it pervades.
다 딘데 먼저 이지 쳐야게 다데 다요 말했어 단데 니나라 우무주베나라 아니 리버스타라 란다마치 틴지 키니 주스 란다마치 틴지 키니 주스 다 치료받으지 마제나 매고레스 그래봐 마제베이나 매고레스 와 이쪽 가려있나 껴와 연구레스 마제나 매고레스 고란즈 딘데라 구여와 라와 인자는 다 지난주 돼야게 다데 요 말베스 김정 가르스나 마제버레스 마제버에 김정 가르스나 딱버레도 가스 딱버에는 마제버 연구로 껴와이나 미다고 연구로 세상에 리버디 만화저 캘린더라 누구르다다 땅에 돼야게 풍불에 된심에 다디 네 요 말레스 김정 가르스나 마제버레스 요나 껴고래 마제베시르스로 가르스나 다디 요나 깨고래 다디 요나 미다고 연구래 고전직 치기도 왔어 아니 요 다디 요나 깨고래 세다 다디 마제버레시스 김정 가르스나 따고래도 왔어 세상 타이나 다 매고도 세제 디 치료가 리버다야 디 간저 캘린더라 누구도 와 누구 다 마제베시스 라비네 녜도야게 다 캘린 풍불에 텐시베 다 딱과디 마제버로 바고 딱과선자 마제버로 다 민두스 김정 가르스나 다디 요나 깨고래 마제베시스디 김정디 딱다 리버데 누구도 다 삼단 투삼단 바이너로
So the position of self is of seeming permanent. The position of permanent self is undermined by another position held. Rangda Tenzig means position then it means line of logic that they themselves accept, and that is if anything exists, it must be produced, and if it is not produced, it would be non-existent. There's a so they say, they hold, if something exists, it must be produced. If it's not produced, then it is non-existent. Then the argument presented is yourself is different from aggregate, doesn't exist. Doesn't exist because it is permanent, and if it is permanent, it is not produced. If it is not produced, then your own position says it doesn't exist, and therefore the charge advanced towards non-Buddhists to repudiate their position, in fact also works to oneself, although one is not a non-Buddhist, but given the unconscious level, one holds the sameness of moments, and therefore permanent.
Long take book yo mares, take book made the Majevic is Lara. A Majeza and a Mevaya Dugura, Tad Durata. Jimzi Jigdatir, Pedishar, da Hunzina, the Sharwa.
So they give an example, and the example is the child of an offspring of a mule. Mosham de means a mule. Mule has, all, to put crudely, the child of a barren woman. And the child of a barren woman, or the offspring of a mule, doesn't exist. Why? Because an offspring is not produced. A mule doesn't produce, and a barren or rather non-fertile woman doesn't give birth to a child. So that the child of such a source doesn't exist. Why? It's not produced.
Tadi Naranzo Nangbala Su Samudanja, Naranzo Kelingala Nura, that Kelila Tangi Lading area, Tandange Pumbule Tenshimbe Dadi, and it Daware, Dawinza Majevre. Chesanta Majevina, maybe Chawada Yomar, that Dawa Majevre Segura Yoro, that Sini Rigotandas in the Chawamar, Inanzo Kelen de la Nugur Harsana. Kesi daina jegawale ani temajiwe chircheza mewe chilamina tagda rigdo aya manazo nangbege che chiroba chido majewe chi gyumzen samlo madamba che manazo yoge yan su sing zimba toriya la samlo damba ina ro ngadi amane jewarwa da manazo kelin chi gorwa ro ngaina da ina jegore cheza nge she dadi jegimendo karasana tagba kelin chi gdwas cheza da yo mares ro odu samdamina manju jimba de la ta nuguyor kelen de la nuguyor o ta de remendo ta de remendo ta de nge yiji che de no sha ani jonan zo ta sol la de ta o ta de yishu lam jor sha ta de nge la mendo ta de kelen che mendo che ani kelen de thodu ro ta khanda ro
So so let's again focus on this argument, not so much to have an argument with the non-Buddhists, but to address the issues that we have ourselves. And one as a person, one as a self, was produced, and because it was self was produced by mother or by parents and produced, so one exists.
다 이나 깨고래 마지베 시스고라 나이나 깨와딩 안아주 나 파만레 깨와 켈린 치고라 제가 텐데게 단다 이게 켈린 시야게 다디 아니 파만레 깨금인도 와제자 솔라이데 아니 깨고래 마지베 시사데 리버데 누구도 하고
So the position in the heart of heart, one that I have, is the I or self seem to be permanent. If it is a permanent, it is unproduced. It has to be unproduced. But how can you say that yourself or myself is permanent? Because when it was produced, it came into being by production by birth from mother, and therefore this line of reasoning will help address this subtle grasping or inability to see the impermanence, rather grasping at permanence. And then one could use the same line of reasoning for soul, and how soul, the issue of soul, its permanence, is also dealt with.
다 김진 상로 직담바이나 근데 다데 간저 이지 가서는 풍불에 텐신배 다시기는 풍불라 대화매된 거지 응외내저디 풍보단 대화도가 네 강발라고 나두가 나오시기도 풍부 진지 채월에 내가 진지 채워셔게도 네 심지고 요만에 가지고 요만에 제가 풍부하다는 배 대화 쉬지 파지 대화 사고 예대와도 세월에 제가 대화 매된 조디 수수생게 차나라 수수생게야 수행ਜੋ 지레 마셔지게 의내줄라다 메타조레샤 something something 야고요라
We can also help ourselves address this issue of self being separate from the aggregates by establishing the connection between self and aggregates. How can we establish the relationship between self and the aggregates? It's quite simple in some ways, in that when aggregate is born, self is born. And when aggregates die, cease to be, and self dies at that time. And then if the aggregate of feet, for example, is hurting, then you say, I am sick, I'm not well. When the aggregate of a mind is undergoing different sensations, then one says, I'm happy, or I'm sad, when in fact it is the mind that. So given this, we can see self is not other than aggregates. Self is very much related to aggregates. That self is separate from or different from is just made up, concocted by the mind.
다디 신데 데베 다스제 란데 데베 다스 라윈데 다 란데 데베 다스 셰운데 란데 치라마 가지 부모가가 다레스니지 야 심직보 다레스니지 진짜 연구여라 ngajayan khajik simji de so da rande de be da ga de thangbo rande de ju de be na da ngo chida ma do de ba simjam ba tinde yore da da chida ma ba chi chizanda ko de 풍불에 된신배 다면 다다 근데 저스네 삼로직 당데 다 배진 풍봉아가르샤스로 소봉 처음 뒤지 더 등아가 다르샤스 야 가시 그 마삼단데 다 심직 보레샤 다 심디 다 켈레니 낭바베 망고여리 지라마 도데와 심잠바 우마란주와 디게게 이기남시 다그 신시 켈렌지고로
Nos.
대산디 낭바 망고여다 심다 켈레니 되네 베 망고여와
So now let's move to refuting self asserted by Buddhist schools. So when Buddhist schools are asked if self doesn't exist as being different from aggregates, how does it exist? So Buddhist schools, for example, Vipashika or the enumerators, Vipashikas, and they say a self is part of the aggregates. So they say all of them. Some of the Vipashikas say all of them. All of the five aggregates are self. Some say the mind is self. So, of the two positions, that mind is self is a position adopted by the Vipashika Sutra school, the mind-only school, the autonomous Madhyamaka school.
세상다데 풍붕아가 다드나 다 망보테베 태와데 따라
So the five now how to correct the position of five aggregates being self. If that was the five aggregates are not self, because if there was self, then they would become synonymously self. In which case, there would be as many selves as there are aggregates.
다딜라 남시 지부 다드니들레 리고 지부 지냐레 남시 지부 마레 다 지부 다베 망보여 남시 망보 쉬우지여라다 남시 망보 쉬우지자 아니 다 망보 쉬우지여라서 다 지기 책 말았다 대 다용 거 지부레 리고디니.
So the same line of reasoning is used to those Buddhist schools who hold that mind is self. And then again the same line of reasoning is used. Mind can't be self, because as for self, one self has only one self. If mind was self, they would become synonymously together, in which case one person, one self, would have as many forms of consciousnesses, and as for mind, there are many types. So the same person will end up having as many selves.
제가다 단디 다디 군저 편담라 요 말에 다 군족이 요래신 시행고로 tenshimbe tandamji yo mare kunzubdi yore sini sheyongora sheyonde da chirama bena che chira nangba sanjewe rubda khashege da se di pungbule tenshimbe takbaje mindos ani pungbula wan yuwa botaverwa pungbula wan yuwa botaver ani takba rese labthya minjo midagwa rese labthya medenjo jodu mebe tachi tu ustadi ranjete be zeyu sadre 어디다 치료바 켈렌치고요레 낭바에게 지라마 낭바 줍다 카시지게 켈렌치고요레 딜라 제가 좀 된데지 다 여거승배 도세저레 풍봉안에 쿠리나 쿠리바는 간사 유에서도 풍봉하데 쿠르레스티 쿠르바보게 ane khansan yores diyo ta yawa ten shaasin ane da kubo de suresna ane rangjawa ge phungbo lo wan juwa bo tabu kwanzo pombo tabu ge wan juwa bo tabu ge ane tende daji dus da de tagwaye mareshas midagwaye mareshas da be jöd megachi rawa jöme ji ta nuba chenbo chi dus adi lagora ta de ngazo zimbo yorta ngazo la yorta de wan juwa bo phungbo lo wan juwa bo tabu ge ane 풍불에 텐심바 임바 칸실래 풍불로 완 주어 붙다베 근데 다버레 람나이 주어도 된joy 베스 미다버레 람나이 주어도 메딘 조스르지 타딩한졸 현지에게 먼저 상말에 요라 팅아란졸 현지에 요르스다 단질 현지에 세부 요르스디
티 단질 현지로 기시
제나 군다당한조 켈린 지금 말하다 현지에 요르스다 딜 현지에 페제 튼도 이제 정말로 열다 란제도 이제 뭘 현재 되다
제 대신 그 계셔 당국이 참조해야 돼 그러면 지금 된 군대 보원들 된다 보원들 갈수
군도 단다 풍봉하자 되는 맨나 란주버도 남시지고 다 인사도 전당도 이제 다음에 단위 군습 요원의 제외다 남시 다레신 셰고요. 어디라고요?
So the Buddhist schools of thought who hold either all of the five aggregates are self or mind is the self, and then there is a no. They would say, we hold that only in conventional terms that mind is self or aggregates are self, but in ultimate terms, ultimately in ultimate truth terms, the mind is not self, only in conventional terms. So now it's moving to the area of Buddhist notion of self called inexpressible self, called Judimebeta, inexpressible self. And they say there is a self that is neither permanent nor impermanent. It is quite difficult to describe. So there is an inexpressible self. It is inexpressible. So how does it exist? It exists by way of being. How does this inexpressible self exist? It is self-sufficient, substantially existing self. Self-sufficient, substantially existing self that seems to have governance, control as a controller of the aggregates. Yet in itself, it is quite hard to determine either to be permanent, impermanent, and so on. So it's inexpressible. So, and do we hold such a position? Although we may deny, but we do hold this position of self-sufficient, substantially existing self, a self that seems to be different from aggregate and controlling the aggregate in its own terms, neither permanent nor impermanent. When you think it's permanent, you're not when you think it's permanent, then you its changing moment defies your belief. Or when you think that it must be impermanent, then it's abiding continuity kind of thing that defies your position. So it's quite hard. It's a tight corner, as it were, not being able to say what it is, and so we do have this we have this 간증 그실랑 줄 안디
현재요 정말
행기어로 다들 랑기 때문에
제일 짐발 현재
so we do have innate grasping at self-sufficient substantially existing self and animals have it
다 배진대 샤워 왜 란제대 제일 짐발 샤워
so let's stop here where at least our self-sufficient substantial existing self gets further destroyed.